All right, guys, welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nicky will be breaking down a massive showdown in the SEC East. The Missouri Tigers traveling to take on the top-ranked Georgia Bulldogs, 17-point favorites. The game will be played in Athens, CBS, 3:30 p.m. East. Looking at the Missouri offense, this has been a pretty good passing attack, showcasing the growth of Brady Cook, probably one of the most improved quarterbacks in college football this year, right on the edge of a 70% comp rate. 2,259 yards. Touchdowns, 3 picks. He's been showcasing great ball security. 2 of those picks against LSU, and again, where he threw a season-high 47 passing attempts. Also had a season-high 411 yards playing from behind. One of those picks ended up sealing the deal, though, for LSU at home. Missouri's passing attack, though, Nick, has really been, led by but also a trio of pass catchers. Theo Weiss, 440 yards and 5 touchdowns coming over from Oklahoma. Mookie Cooper has 359 and 28 grabs. And, of course, Luther Bird, 905 yards, 6 touchdowns on 61 receptions. This is a nasty, versatile trio. Luther Burden at one point was, crystal balled to go to Georgia. The Bulldogs did not end up getting him. And the Bulldog fans were pretty, butthurt by it, quite frankly. They said he must not want to win. Well, Nick, on Saturday, he has an opportunity to win and do it on a big way. This passing attack, though, led by him, has just been phenomenal this year.
I said Luther Burden had to be involved in the Missouri game plan if Eli Drinkwitz wanted his star player to stay in Columbia. When he committed to Missouri, it was a fascinating commitment. They kept him in the state of Missouri. Like you said, he was crystal balled to Georgia, so certainly a lot of people thought he was going to head to Athens. He ends up staying home, staying in the state of Missouri. That was a huge get for Eli Drinkwitz. I love the move, but we said the preseason last year that he had to be involved early or else he was going to consider transferring in the NIL era. Obviously, transferring is a big thing now with the portal being so relevant. Didn't get a whole lot of touches last year as much as we expected, but this year I said he had to break out this year. This had to be the year, and he's breaking out. 905 yards, 14.8 yards per catch, and 6 scores. Luther Burden is just an absolute star in the SEC at this moment. One of the best wide receivers in the nation, if not the best. And he has a great supporting cast with Theo Weiss, Mookie Cooper, and Marquez Johnson behind him as well. Brady Cook has really evolved into this great prolific passer that's sitting in the pocket, getting the job done. 70% completion percentage, 2,259 yards, and 15 scores plus the 3 picks, like you said, the 2 bad picks against LSU. This passing attack is great. 294 per game through the air, 443 total offense per game for this Missouri Tigers team. They're in a great spot here. Luther Burden is just an incredible weapon to have. He adds so much versatility. You can really do what you want with him and draw up any sort of game plan. It certainly helps when you have a player like that that's a complete wild factor.
Yeah, in this running game, led by Cody Schrader, former walk-on. He was transferring from some low-level FCS schooler, somewhat 807 yards, 9 touchdowns, just over 100 yards per contest. Nathaniel Pete, a veteran, 274, about 40 yards per game for him. They just need to be complimentary. You're not really ever going to be able to run the ball over Georgia. They've certainly been vulnerable with some downhill running this year. Florida was able to expose it a little bit. Auburn, they certainly did with some, versatility in their backfield and at quarterback. Last year, though, Missouri, I thought it was quite complimentary. Remember, they ripped off some nice runs in that one, where they ended up losing by 4 points at home to Georgia in a game they led for the most part. 102 yards rushing, about 4.8 yards per carry. That's the key there. Obviously, in terms of total yardage, you're not going to put up a whole lot against this Bulldog defense. That game against Auburn, the only one since they played Joe Burrow's LSU where they've allowed 200-plus rushing in a game. They just got to be efficient and complimentary. You can't be getting tackled for a loss, Nick. They got to be able to stay ahead of the sticks. Even if it's 2 or 3 yards, that's going to be the best way to attack this defense. What is your confidence level in this backfield that's also featuring, a strong left side led by Javon Foster and Xavier Delgado on the offensive line?
Certainly have to just stay above the sticks, stay in front of the sticks, do not make mistakes, do not get tackled for a loss. Schrader is having a great season compared to where he was, like I said, as a previous walk-on, 5.8 yards per carry, the 9 scores, 800 yards for him. Daniel Pete's a good number 2 back there. I think Pete is actually a really solid guy to have in your backfield at 274 on the ground, 4.4 and 2 scores. Brady Cook, for his part, also has 5 rushing touchdowns, 134 yards on the ground. So he is certainly an opportunity to use his legs in the red zone, a nice red zone threat there. About 150 yards per game on the ground for this Missouri Tigers offense. This is a very nice balanced offense. I like the balance they have. They have to have a balanced attack against Georgia. They do need to find a way to get good runs against them. Like you said, that was success that Auburn had. Florida had a little success with that as well. They're going to have to find a way to move the ball on the ground early in the game because Georgia's shown some weakness against the run so far this season.
Yeah, Foster, left tackle, is having an All-American type season. Connor Tollison's been a really good run blocker for them at center. Ahmad Babu, he's been a solid right tackle pass blocker. This offensive line, they have some really good size and they have some, leadership here. Plenty of snaps to go around. This is going to be their biggest test yet, though. I am going to expect, though, a heavy dosage of this pass with this receiving core. Really got to keep them on their heels in the secondary. Florida first drive of the game went right down the field with some confidence. Didn't work the rest of the game because their tackles just started getting absolutely leveled by this Georgia pass rush. And if these tackles can hold up, Nick, and they can be strong on the interior with that complementary run game, I think this offense will be pretty confident in where they're at, considering these receivers can win downfield and they can win in terms of yards after catch.
I certainly think this is a team that has a good offensive line that needs to just hold up against a strong Georgia defensive line. They can give Brady Cook time to stand in the backfield and be able to do what he can. This is a very talented wide receiving room that has so many different options that they can use. They can hit Bird in stride. They can find themselves in a good, successful offense on Saturday.
Yeah, one more thing to mention, Brady Cook, he's a gamer of his legs. He can pick up large chunks if the ability is there. Certainly, you got to be in man coverage and got to pass block pretty well for that to happen. But Cook with his legs, he can certainly pick up timely first downs or even be a threat in the red zone. Looking at the Georgia offense, Carson Beck is consistently improving. He's been great as a downfield passer, especially in these games against SEC opponents. That's really where he's played his best, coming off a pretty stout performance against Florida. He did play the greatest of games against Vanderbilt, but outside of that, he's been a phenomenal passer for Georgia, really taking the keys of this offense very well. 14 touchdowns, 308 yards per game, 70% completion rate, and he's still a young quarterback, so again, he's still going to make some mistakes. He did have interception in 3 straight games before heading to Jacksonville against Florida, where he was able to really showcase his ability downfield without Brock Bowers. And we wondered what the strategy would be, and it was quite simple, just to spread it out to your other weapons. Bowers, of course, leads them in everything. He's just such a big playmaker for them. Dominic Lovett finally got his speed exposed a little bit. Robert Thomas got some touches. Most importantly, Ladd McConkey, though, he showcased what he can do, especially yards after catch. He's a guy who's great at finding soft spots in the zones. He can win 1-on-1 downfield, 135 yards on 6 grabs and a big touchdown there against the Gators. This isn't the most talented supporting cast by any means in terms of stars at the wide receiver position. Dominic Lovett, though, a former Missouri receiver, there'll be some, animosity on both sides, I imagine. Dylan Bell, Makai Muse, Oscar Delp at tight end. He had a nice one-handed grab, certainly similar size tight end, 6'5", 245. They still have plenty of weapons here, Nick. They certainly spread it out to them. The reason why they're so good is they get these guys involved, in positions that really fit their skill set. That's what great coaching does, and that's why Georgia's so successful, despite some of these guys not being the most talented, like McConkey being a former walk-on, Marcus Rosemy, Jack Saint as well, third on the team in receiving yards with 341. So this is just a phenomenal way that Georgia incorporates these weapons, and without Bowers, Nick, they flourished.
They flourished without Bowers. We worried without Bowers they might struggle. They ended up scoring 43 points against Florida, looking pretty good. Carson Beck has talked himself into the Heisman conversation a little bit here, of a pretty good season so far. 2,462 total yards of passing, 14 touchdowns, 4 interceptions for him. He's having a really solid season, taking over the reins of this offense. 73% completion percentage. The 4 picks, not a bad number. Beck's having a good season. Even without Bowers this past week, he was able to spread the ball out. Lovett's having a good season. Like you said, Dominic Lovett, a very talented wide receiver that came over from Missouri, was really good at Missouri, and now he's stepped up at Georgia and having a pretty good season, 365 yards receiving, 10.4. 1 score. Marcus Rosemary Jackson, 341 and 2 scores. Ra Thomas, 275. Ladd McConkey, 242. Want to see him continue to be involved. Oscar Delep looked good this past week against Florida, 191 for him and 2 scores. So there's no real player that jumps off the screen here other than Brock Bowers. Outside of Brock Bowers, this is really just a balanced passing attack that has so many different guys they can use in different positions. Bowers is really your big X factor. Without him, it certainly weakens this passing attack, but this is still a team that's averaging 334 yards per game through the air and 500 total yards of offense. This offense definitely scores a lot, and they have a lot of good opportunities to pick up nice yardage with what they have in the backfield, what they have at wide receiver.
Yeah, the physicality is still the name of the game with Georgia. This running back room's not as healthy in years past, and that's, led to Dejon Edwards getting an uptick and, volume, 5 touchdowns. Kendall Milton's been efficient. Dylan Bell is a bit of a Swiss Army. So they're not as deep in the backfield. 5 yards per carry, though, as a team. That is still highly improved. Only 1 game of 200-plus rushing yards, Nick. Do you think they're holding something back, or do you think they're really struggling to run the ball? Because they only had 107 yards against Auburn. Back had to win that game on the road late. Against Kentucky either. I think they're holding some back. There are certain points, even against Ball State, they only had 99 yards. I mean, there's times this year where it's kind of been like, Broderick Jones's absence at left tackle is certainly noticeable. Emarius Mims at right tackle. Still a very good offensive line led by Cedric Van Pran. But the production is probably anticipated. But 22 touchdowns and that 5 yards per carry. Now,
The 5 yards per carry number and the 22 scores is certainly an impressive number. You expect the production to be a little bit higher, so this is certainly a bit of a weak or production than you would expect out of this team, which is a little concerning if you're a Georgia fan, but they still are able to produce on the ground. It might be a new offensive line, Broderick Jones being gone, maybe certainly part of that. There are some different moving pieces on the offensive line that are playing this year that may be involved with the reasoning behind that. Dijon Edwards having a good season, 555, 5.8, and 8 scores for him. Kendall Milton, 251, 5.1, and 4 scores. Dylan Bell, 124, 5.4, and 2 scores for him. So they are spreading it out. Edwards is still your number one back there. They have 172 yards per game on the ground, which is a pretty good number, but you expected it to be closer to to that 200 mark for Georgia this year. A bit disappointing if you're a Bulldogs fan. I think the offensive line may be a little bit shaky and not getting those nice lanes for these running backs.
Yeah, the interior is still stout. Tate Ratledge there at right guard. Ernest Green at left tackle to recruit. And then Xavier Truss at right tackle. These guys, being pushed into these situations. It's been a bit of a bumpy road for them. But pass protection overall has been very sound. They're playing pretty good Missouri front here. We'll see if this bothers them as the year goes along. But physicality, that's still the biggest way to win in college football in Georgia. They still have that in terms of top-notch. Overall final thoughts on this offense is that they don't get the respect they deserve, Nick. Everyone wants to talk about the defense, but these guys consistently click. You talk about the offensive line, the size, the run game, how efficient and healthy they typically are, and in the passing game. These guys are just incredibly difficult to get off the and Carson Beck just continues to get better. 56% conversion rate on third down this season.
This is a very good offense that is very efficient. They're a clinical offense. We worried with a new coordinator would they still have the same efficiency that they had in the past, but they're in a very efficient unit. Even without Brock Bowers this past week, they were still able to put up 43 points and have a really good game against a pretty solid Florida defense. This is a very good offense that Missouri's going to have to find a way to slow down.
Yeah, and you look at that unit, it's going to be tasked with slowing them down in Athens. They have to play good or they're not going to win this game. Even if the offense is putting up numbers playing from behind, is what's going to happen if this defense isn't playing very good. And it starts with a defensive line. Guys like Johnny Walker and Darius Robinson have really stepped up this season. The guys like Niles Gady and Josh Landry, veteran defensive linemen. I think they have, especially on the interior, this is certainly a unit they've built up over the last. Robinson, though, at defensive end, 6'5", almost 300 pounds, leads them with 7.5. This is a very good front seven, I would say. But the linebackers have to play better on the year due to the disciplinary issues, and he's been phenomenal for them. But his co-part has to be better in Tyrone Hopper. He's been there good with production, but, in terms of, missed tackles and being out of position, that's certainly something that's been an issue for him, one of the lower-graded defenders on the team. He was phenomenal a season ago, but he's proven to be a liability in this season. Has missed a boatload of tackles, 16 of them. That's not a great number at all. These guys have to play to their potential in the middle, Nick, or they're going to get absolutely ran over. This defensive line, though, again, with the size and some of the, veteran leadership here, pretty happy with what their opportunities are going to be coming into this game. But Hopper and Bailey, they're going to dictate how this running offense goes for Georgia. How do you think they'll fare?
This defense is giving up 338 total yards of offense per game. Hopper, he's got to be better. I think he needs to improve. I think he's going to have a tough day, which will certainly be a problem for Missouri. He does have good tackle production, right? 43 total tackles leading the team, 5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, 3 pass rates. Like you said, the missed tackles, about 16, is just a bad number for him. You really need to do better there. Bailey, who dealt with disciplinary issues, he's back playing. He's having a better season in terms of lack of missed tackles. He has 17 total tackles, 1 tackle for loss, 1 sack. But the lack of production is certainly noticeable with those two. When you look at the front defensive line of this unit here, Johnny Walker's having a good season, 31 total tackles, 7.5 tackles for loss, 4 sacks for him. Darius Robbins, 7.5 tackles, 4.5 sacks, plus 28 total tackles. Good numbers. Josh Landry, 25 total tackles, 2.5 tackles for loss. Niles Gady, two tackles for loss, 2 sacks, 18 total tackles, and Relias George Jr. with 17 total tackles, 1.5 tackles for loss, and 1.5 sacks. So these guys do produce. They have some good numbers, but they've been getting beat over the middle and certainly getting beat on the ground at certain times. They give up 112 yards on the ground and 226 through the air. They need to be clinical, make sure they wrap up and get those tackles, because if you let Georgia get second chance opportunities, they're going to absolutely burn you there.
Yeah, Hopper at 14 TFL last year, not really on the same pace. Neither is this entire team in terms of negative plays. Their run defense, though, they stepped up against South Carolina, not something that's hard to do. Kentucky kind of exposed them a little. Certainly did. We expect that to be the Jaden Daniels show, and it was really just the ground game led by Logan Diggs, 274 and 2 touchdowns allowed at home. They did very well against Kansas State, though. They played well against Memphis, some closer games in September. It was hard for them to win by more than a couple of points for Missouri. But, since stepping into conference play, this offense has really taken off. The defense is also playing much better. But they can't have a repeat of what happened against LSU, Nick, and that is certainly going to be a concern. Of course, Bailey was just working his way back into the lineup, but Tyrone Hopper has to be better at producing some negative plays and getting into the backfield. Guys like Jaden Jernigan as well, Realist George, like you mentioned. These are some good players that, they're all seniors as well. They all have some nice size. This is the perfect time for them to have a great coming out party, something they can talk about in 20 years as a reunion party.
This is certainly an opportunity for this front seven to have a good day. They got beat against LSU. They have to find a way to make sure they get beat and not get beat and limit the amount of big play potential from this Georgia offense, especially on the ground. They got to stonewall this Georgia running back room and make sure that Georgia has to pass the ball and find a way to get after back in the backfield.
Now you look at a secondary, we gave high praise to elite Enos Rakasaw Jr. Cornerback position has been phenomenal for them. And on the other side, Chris Abrams, Drainee, 10 pass breakups, 4 interceptions. Georgia, those they don't really attack you on the outside. It's more about what happens in the middle of the field. This 4-2-5 certainly has to be stout, and they also have some veterans at those safety positions. Jalen Carlisle is one. Orlando, 36 tackles, 2 pass breakups. Joseph Charles as well. This is a secondary that, again, they have great corners on the outside, but it's really going to be up to these safeties. Nell is having a really good season. Charleston, I alluded to him. He's, been more inconsistent, as really has the entire safety group. I think he plays the slot. I believe he came over from Florida. Hasn't had the greatest of season, but, still playing against the Bulldogs. That rivalry is still going to be deep in his hearts, of course. I think they match up pretty well. Like I said, those 2 corners on the outside. Ball players for Missouri. They have to be able to create, though, and that goes for all guys, all they get on the field. What do you think is going to be in store for this Missouri secondary? Because they are, they certainly struggled a little bit with LSU, but who really doesn't? But outside of that, they've been good. Some of these passing numbers, I think, with them playing from ahead in games like Memphis, Kansas State, I think they're fighting their way back in that one. Gave up some big plays in that. Anchored down. They've been very good. The last 2 weeks against and South Carolina, had the bye week here to prepare for this one. I think will fare.
This is certainly a good unit that is a hard-hitting, ball-hawking unit that gets after and is very good in production. Chris Abrams, Drainee, is having a great season. 10 pass breakups to 4 interceptions. Great marks for him. 35 total tackles. Joseph Charleston, 42 total tackles, 2 pass breakups. Dylan Carnell, 37 total tackles, 5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, 5 pass breakups. Jalen Carlisle's 36 total tackles, 2 pass breakups. Ernest Rakastraw Jr., 3 pass breakups, 1.5 sacks, 23 total tackles for him. He also only played in 6 games. Jerez Johnson, 23 total tackles. Drayden Norwood, 12 total tackles. Each of them have a couple pass breakups. This is a good unit that gets physically in there and breaks up the pass. They're going to have to find a way to pick off back here. Turnovers are going to be a big opportunity. Can they get turnovers? Can they force Beck to make a mistake? They get up 226 total yards per game through the air. They're going to have to cut that number down certainly against Georgia if they want to be competitive in this game.
And comp rate by the opposition, a fair number as well. And Drayden Norwood, he's a tackler. So they're pretty happy here with these corners. You're going to get a lot of zone. Typically, when you play the 4-2-5, they have to be stout in the middle of the field. So obviously those corners are great, but I'm more worried about what's going to happen in the middle of the field with those safeties. But if they can force them to try and challenge them out wide, Georgia doesn't exactly have the size out there. They certainly have the speed when it comes to guys like Lovett. I guess Thomas is a physical guy who can win outside, but it's more so going to be in the red zone. Should be a fun matchup here, closely contested, but they can't slow down the run. It's going to be an issue for Missouri. Looking at the Georgia defense, obviously this is a very stout unit once again. But like we alluded to against the run, and obviously on the stat sheet, you're not going to see that. But if you watch the games, you certainly was running right at them. Florida had some success, even when they were playing from behind. And they were able to do that with some success. Only 109 yards total for Florida. They also did have a lot of sacks, I believe, that really helps that number go down. Completely stifled Kentucky, only 55 yards allowed there. Putting the stat sheet away, Nick, obviously the lack of first-round talent, because they've had so many of those guys over the past couple of years, is evident. Guys like Nazir Stackhouse, Warren Brinson. These are big players, right? And they're very good at playing football. Zion Logue as well. But they are not, Jalen Carter type players for Georgia. And that's, consistent. That play you would see with this defensive line. Still great speed from the linebackers, though. Ismail Munden, Xavier Sori, and that's really helped make up for some of the boundary is very tough for opponents, and that's what Missouri's going to want to do. They want a lot of outside zones, and Georgia's really going to look to crack that down. But what are your thoughts on this defensive line, considering, again, the talent seems to not be up to par, but they're still the best run defense in the country?
They still are the best run defense in the country, giving up 93.6 yards per game on the ground, a very good number for them. But you would expect the number to be higher. I think this team is just a little disappointing on defense. It's probably because they are lacking that true talent. They are sort of reloading and kind of plugging in that new talent. Smell Mundon leading the way in tackles at linebacker, 37 total tackles, 5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks for him. Jamon Dumas Johnson, 27 total tackles, 5.5 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks. Xavier Slory. But then the tackles numbers, they jumped. Slory has 14 total tackles, 1.5 tackles for loss and a sack. Chaz Chimbliss has 12 total tackles. Nazir Stackhouse 10. Warren Brenson 8. Zion Logie 7. Mikael Williams 6. So the numbers drop off very quickly. I know they have a huge number of people to get involved and take away tackles from each other, but it's just disappointing. There's no one really totally jumping off the page as a true down and out tackler other than Smell Mundon, who has that 37 total tackles leading the way. This unit's a very good unit. Obviously, they held a lot of their teams basically to 20 points and under has been the limit. They haven't given up more than 20 points, except UAB scored 21. So they really hold offenses very well. Obviously, a Kirby Smart defense is a very hard-hitting, strong defense. They just leave a little bit to be desired here. And when they're playing against a dynamic offense like Missouri, the Tigers could certainly have a chance to pick off and get some good opportunities to score points early on.
Only 16 sacks for the Bulldogs, and obviously this is number and we even said they're going to find ways to get their sacks, and that's what they did with slot corner blitzes last week against Georgia. Jalen Walker really stepped up. Mikael Williams not really having the season that we envisioned. 2.5 sacks for him. Certainly waiting for has plenty of power, plenty of speed that can change the game on one play. Not a great sack figure from Georgia, but they get their own. And Walker's late emergence has certainly been notable. But again, this is a team that never greatly has production to be the best. That's their name of the game, is team defense. In the secondary, though, led by Malachi Starks out on an All-American campaign at safety. He's a phenomenal ball player. Kamari Lassiter is a very sound corner on the end. And back to the pass rush, Chaz Chambliss, he's a veteran, but I'm not really a great fan of his. He's been better against the run, but as a pass rusher, kind of lacks that power and moves. Back to the secondary, though. Starks, he's phenomenal, right? He's really cleaned up some of the mistakes he made last year that hurt this defense. He's not been a liability one bit. Lassiter's phenomenal. Tyke Smith finally being healthy has been beneficial for this defense. Javon Buller, he's having a quiet year, but he's still being very sound in coverage. He's really a leader back there for them. They start to move him a little bit more around this season. Tyke Smith, though, he's going to have the biggest job of the weekend defending guys like finally started putting in that position, Nick, Missouri, and it's been highly beneficial for them. Go for them. You think they're going to leave him on an island there in the middle of the field, or you think they're going to get a little bit more? I think it's a very interesting approach, because that's where Missouri hurts you the most themselves, is in the middle of the field. But the versatility of these receivers is certainly going to be on display, you'd hope.
It is certainly an interesting matchup to see Everett against Luther Burden. Everett for himself, 5 pass breakups, leading the team, 11 total tackles for him. That's going to be an interesting matchup. I think they will leave him one-on-one and say, my man could beat your man. Let's see what happens here. I think Burden has a win in that matchup potentially. Kamara Lassiter is having a good season, 26 total tackles, 3.5 tackles for loss, 4 pass breakups. Malachi Starks looking better, certainly 29 total tackles, 2 interceptions, 4 pass breakups. Tyreek Smith, 4 interceptions, 2 pass breakups, 3 total tackles, 5 tackles for loss. Definitely, in my opinion, your best player on the defense in terms of pure production. Javon Bullard, 27 total tackles, 3 pass breakups for him. The numbers are good on this secondary. They're a big physical unit that hits hard. They got good coverage assets. I think it's a tough matchup against a guy like Burden, who is so dynamic. They've given up 178 total yards through the air so far this season per game. This is an interesting matchup. I think you can certainly potentially give the edge to a guy like Burden against these DBs. We've seen great DBs or great wide receivers burn these DBs in the past. Looking at Ohio State last year, I know this is a different team than last year, but they could certainly find an opportunity to get Burden behind and burn these guys.
Yeah, Dalen Everett's another guy you want to attack. He's not having the greatest of seasons. The last guys are going to be the toughest players in the secondary, and of course, Malachi versatility. Like you said, though, they've been hurt before by talented receivers. They held up very well against Tennessee. That was going to be the game plan. Very simple from them. I don't think we'll see as here, but they faced a lot more speed last year and absolutely stifled them. So maybe that's going to on Cork. Looking at the tail of the tape, the team comparisons. I'm going to give Carson Beck's having a great season, but it certainly hasn't been without flaws. And Brady Cook, over the last couple of years, he's shown how much heart he can play with and how much he can be a game changer with his legs. And, he's kind of a gamer at the quarterback position. So I'll go ahead and give Missouri the edge. improvements. Running back position, Georgia, they're not as deep as in years past with some injuries. I'm still going to give them the advantage there. Wide receiver, Missouri, we have, and that's really all they have. Like Georgia has plenty of different options, but the production and the talent's too much to pass up with the Tigers. Most of these are going to go to Georgia, the offensive line. Missouri, they're not trailing too far behind, but you have to be able to showcase you can match Georgia from a physicality standpoint. And even though they have a great left side, Javon Foster is phenomenal. Delgado's a really Georgia's going to get the edge there, even with some, shakiness at the tackle position. Defensive line, pretty unanimous there. And in the linebacking position, Missouri, they have two stout players themselves in Hopper and Bailey, but the Bulldogs have much more speed, and those guys are great tone set. Secondary, though, I'm going to give it to Missouri. I think this is a very talented bunch. They've been productive. They've been great on the outside. Georgia certainly also has a very talented secondary, especially against the more talented receivers. Do you think this is a fair tale to tape, Nick, with Missouri?
I think this is certainly interesting. I think they do get the advantage at wide receiver and at defensive back. I think quarterback is definitely a toss-up. I think I'd be leaning Beck just because Beck is having a better season, but Cook is the better player in terms of his career numbers. This is a very interesting matchup. Georgia fans are not going to like this. They think they probably run Missouri across the board here. I disagree with that. I think this Missouri team is a lot better than people are giving them credit for. They have one loss in the season. They're 7-1 for a reason. They're a very talented ball club with a very good secondary that we raved about all offseason and an incredible wide receiver room with the best wide receiver in the country potentially.
The final thoughts on the prediction. Keys to the game is defense must be up to the challenge. From a physicality standpoint, not. You got to get these wide receivers involved as much as possible. If that includes motion on every single play, that's what you got to do. But these guys cannot go without a touch. You've seen Florida as the game went on. They started not to get their main guys involved. Started shying away from them. It was just a disaster for the entire con. And the key's gonna be the same each week. Just continued balance and just overwhelm people with your physicality. Anytime you play in Athens, especially as a 17-point favorite, Georgia runs the risk of completely blowing you out by 30, 40 points. And that could certainly happen here, Nick, and I wouldn't be shocked one bit, which would be disappointing because this is a nice ball club Drinkwitz has. I'm going to be more conservative here. Georgia 35, Missouri 23. I really think this is an offense that can hang in this game. And I think that secondary, they're going to be able to limit some of the bigger plays against Georgia. How they do against the run, though, really remains to be seen. But if these linebackers can play up to the potential, they can get off the field more often than not. Again, though, this could be a complete blowout, even though Missouri is a good ball club that's ranked 7-1, like you said. Anytime you play in Athens, though, it's tough. But these guys, they held with Georgia last year, and they were supposed to get blown out in that one, right? So I think Drinkwitz, with a much more experienced, mature ball club, including the improvements at quarterback, I think they'll hang around a little bit. Georgia by 12. How do you think this one's going to go? Same prediction as me, but again, the risk of a blowout, how I
think the risk of the blowout's not as likely as people think it is. I think Missouri, they hung in with this Georgia team last year. They held them very close, which was not a very good Missouri team compared to this one. This team is leaps and bounds better than that one last year. A lot more experience. It's tough on the road. If this game was in Columbia, I certainly would be potentially picking the upset. I'd be leaning that way. But I'm not going to pull the trigger. I think that Georgia is going to win this game. I don't think they cover, I think 17, 16 and a half, whatever you want to get it at. And your books is certainly a lofty line, in my opinion. I like the way that Missouri looks in this game. I think they have a good opportunity. The defense certainly has a challenge here, but I think this is a very physical team that is very good. I think they have a great opportunity here to be involved in this game on the road. It's going to be very loud in that stadium. Obviously, Athens, that fan base is going to be very loud. They got a couple tough tests coming up here, hosting Missouri, hosting Tennessee, not too far down the line. I think Missouri can hang around early. I just think Georgia has too much five-star talent and too much potential to pull away late in this one. Going to be a very interesting matchup, though. There is certain upset potential here, in my opinion. I'm not interested in pulling the trigger right now. I think these teams are just a little too far apart, but this is a game that I think will be close. It certainly is worth watching on Saturday.
Yeah, Georgia, they've struggled against inferior Carolina. One of those coming at home, of course. And then we talked about after the opportunity for a bounce back and absolutely hammered the Wildcats. Not a bounce back opportunity, though. They're coming off another big win, so maybe you can come in here and make this team think a little bit. If you can come out to a hot start, Georgia, they've had some slow starts this year. That wasn't the case against Florida, though. A lot on the line here for both ball clubs. That's me for today's episode. Wait a minute.
Absolutely looking forward to this one. This should be a great SEC ranked matchup.
Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.